So by the time this video's been uploaded, the Master Duel World Championship qualifier first stage should have already started. So I figured right now is a good time to just review the how good the hand traps are for this meta, as for myself and as resources for other people that are watching this video. And we can just get started right away. These categories should be pretty self-explanatory. Actually, before we start, this is roughly, I know Master Duel meta is like not a perfect encapsulation of what you're gonna face. This doesn't include most of Asian players, but generally I think this is like a rough enough idea to where we can get a glance of what's you would expect to face, and it's gonna be primarily tier elements. And then with the next three most popular decks are, one of them is Flunderies, which is the anti-tier deck that can run lots of anti-tier, anti-graveyard cards. Exo-Sister is like Flunderies, but a bit worse, as in it's more vulnerable to stuff. And then sprite variants, a lot of sprite variants happen to be Melfi sprite variants that attempt to turbo out Herald versus tier. So these are going to be the primary 4 deck variants I'm gonna be judging the hand traps based upon, and then everything else will most likely fall under some sort of rogue. We'll lump them together as rogue. And you see Brand Despia. Brand Despia is just another tier variant. Anything that uses tier is going to be considered as basically a tier variant. So first off, we have Ash Blossom, and if you go by the categories, Ash Blossom is not great versus. If you're not good against tier, I can't place you in the top 2 categories, because tier is going to be overwhelmingly the most represented deck, like in the qualifiers and like just in Master in general. So if you're only mediocre against tier like Ash Blossom is, this is as high as you'll go, which is still like it's like okay, because Ash Blossom at the very least, maybe not so if you're playing tier itself, but if you're playing anything that's not tier, that's not Flunderies, you probably want Ash Blossom just as a way to mitigate Maxi right here, because your deck probably loses the Maxi way harder, and this is just having that while still being good against everything that's not exactly tier and sprite. So it's still good against Exo-Sister, it's still good against Flu. And it's not useless against tier. There are some hits where if your opponent has a bad hand, Ash is high impact, it can stop middle 3s, like it's not a dead card. Like say Maxi would be against Flu, so it's not the greatest hand trap this format, which is one of the first formats I think in a while where Ash isn't automatically like a top 3 hand trap minimum. Next we have Lumpin. I like to lump in the 3 graveyard hate hand traps together: Bell, Ash, and Crow. Or Bell, Crow, and Meister. So we're gonna start out with what I think is the best one, which is Crow. Crow is fantastic versus tier. We don't have Bystials right now, so this is the best form of anti-graveyard disruption versus tier elements, simply because Bell and Meister can easily be chain blocked if they happen to mill multiple triggers into the grave. And then if for example, if they mill like a spell and trap like a Sulliek or a Scream along with the tier name, they can put the tier name as Chainlink 1, and then you wouldn't be able to Bell to stop the fusion. You would be able to Meister to stop the graveyard effects, the graveyard effect of the Sulliek or the Scream, but you wouldn't be able to stop them from summoning the Kit Kalos out or any fusion, which is the thing that you're usually more worried about when they start milling. So for that reason alone, the Crow is the best out of 3 in my opinion. Now the thing is, as mentioned, against other decks, against the other 3 most represented decks you're expecting to see, like Flunder, Exo-Sister, and Sprite, Crow is like honestly really bad against them. All three of these graveyard traps are really bad against them because those decks that don't really focus on use of the graveyard at all. So if you're gonna, and like against even rogue matchups, it's like hit or miss. Like Crow has never been the best hand trap in like non-tier formats either. So this is one of those hand traps that's really good against tier, but if you face non-tier, it's gonna be you might find these to be less useful. And then ask for Bell and Meister, like they're still decent. They're not as consistently as effective against Crow, but whichever one, like I could be convinced either way to put these. So they have slightly different utilities, and it probably just depends on which deck you're gonna play them in. Meister can hit more graveyard triggers versus tier. Like for example, Meister can hit the millers from the millers like Agito and Kelbeck, whereas Bell can't. So you can stop the mill 5, which is pretty relevant. And as aforementioned, it can hit the aforementioned spell and trap tier spell and trap mills, like Sulliak and Scream from adding cards. And Crow or Bell is something that also stops anti-graveyard cards, such as Crow itself. It can stop opposing Crows from banishing stuff from the grave. It can stop Called by the Grave. And what's noted is that both of these, the one aspect that these two, Bell and Meister, are better than Crow at is these two can more effectively stop shufflers, since they can file and negate a shuffler, whereas Crow, you have to preemptively fire off Crow and they can still chain the shuffler to remove stuff if you have anything relevant in grave, so it's like not as good specifically against shufflers. And Bell is slightly better against shufflers in that regard, since Bell can hit the shufflers that banish themselves from the field as well, whereas Meister can only hit the shufflers that banish themselves from the grave. So yeah, these could be either which way depending on what deck you build. Valor next. I want to talk about Imperm. So I think Imperm is a hand trap that's great against everything. Against tier, the fact that they can hit Kick Hollows is huge, because since it stops both effects. Unlike Ash, which only stops the add, it doesn't stop them from the special summoning. So if they already draw have another tier name, like it honestly is quite low impact. Imperm stops the Kid Kalos add effect, and it stops the special summon effect, so it can't like sack itself to go to the grave to mill 5 and special a tier name. You know, it just stops the Kid Kalos flat, and it's a hard once per turn too. So yeah, it's pretty impactful in that regard against tier. And obviously, unlike Crow and Bell and Meister, which are pretty much only good against tier, Imperm hits the other stuff. Like Imperm hits Flu, you know, if they don't have the quick play spell, but obviously if it resolves against Flu, it's like very high impact. It's still good against Exo Sister. Like I'm pretty sure Imperm is good against almost every rogue deck that uses monsters. Like Adamanticator, you can stop the Gallon Granite from adding Block Dragon. Against Sprite, if they opt to go for red instead of carrot, Imperm can stop stuff like Gigantic. It's just good against everything while still being good against tier. And Valor next is so I think this is the format where there's the absolute biggest discrepancy between Imperm and Valor. Like so much so to where like I would put Valor a full tier below Imperm, which is like sounds crazy because like as hand trap these are basically the same thing, right? But like there's just so many more like situations where Imperm specifically being a trap that you can also activate on your turn is more impactful than Valor. So first off, the two like very obvious reasons is that Valor can get called by it, whereas Imperm cannot, and Valor plays into triple tactics talons very heavily, which is really bad because tier is like tier builds are very heavy on triple tactics, and Imperm being against a hand with that against a tier hand that's triple tactics is very good because now you stop their play and leave them with a dead card in hand, whereas Valor is you know, it could go really bad for you if they have the tactics. And then against the other decks, Exosister, Flu, Sprite, so those decks play Shifter, and those decks also, some builds are playing Dimension Fissure. So if you're playing against those decks and you have a Valor and they activate one of those five cards, you know, Shifter or Fissure, like Valor's dead. Like Valor is literally like not doing anything. It's a 0/0/0 monster tuner at that point. Whereas Imperm, you can still Imperm under a Shifter or a Fissure that's active. Also, if you happen to be playing one of those decks, such as Flu, Exo, Sprite, or any deck that pretty much plays Shifter, that can play Shifter or those anti-graveyard cards, what happens against tier often is if you Shifter a tier or Fissure a tier player, they will try to make Baguska because they know that Baguska is very effective against those kinds of decks. And then especially if you Shifter them, like they can very easily stall out one turn under Baguska, and then after Shifter expires, like you're in kind of in a bad position since you know you were locked under their Baguska for one turn, and then the Shifter effect goes away. And obviously, you know, Valor, you can Imperm the Baguska and that just outs it immediately, whereas Valor is not. You know, you can't really do that with a Valor. And even in like the tier mirror itself, right? The fact that if they don't set up, like a lot of tier players, if in a mirror match, they tend to shotgun Dweller in the draw phase to play around stuff like first action pitch a Shuffler, or perhaps playing around TTT. Like say they got max seed and all they have is a Dweller on field, you could play around the tactics by activating Dweller in draw phase. And if they don't have an elf there, you know, Imperm is like a weight that can handle Dweller. You know, they don't always play around Imperm with Dweller in a tier mirror. You know, sometimes it's not the correct play, but you know, you obviously there's no situation where Valor is gonna do something against the Dweller. You know, so that's on your turn. And yeah, also, you know, if floodgates are popular, Imperm also, like, it does out floodgates, like like literally, like just classically just set Imperm out of floodgate. You know, like again, Valor, dead cards against Fissure, dead cards against Macro. Imperm can just out one of those for a turn, and the turn's all you need to be able to go into an Exceed play or a Zeus play, and then just turn the game in your favor. So yeah, all of that utility put together makes me think that it's okay. It's correct to put Imperm a tier above Valor. Well, Valor still, if you're using it in terms of being used as a hand trap, Valor and Imperm are just as Valor is just as good as Imperm if you're able to use it as a hand trap. And I guess the next logical hand trap to look at would then be, I guess, Ghost Mourner, since it's like a Valor for special summons. So the thing is, I actually like Mourner better than Valor a lot of times versus tier, because they do a lot of fusion summoning, they do a lot of special summoning during your turn, and while Valor can't do anything to that, Mourner can. Only issue with Mourner is that since Flu is the second most represented deck, even if it's like by a wide margin, like there's just this card like being absolutely dead 100% of the time versus flu, whereas Veiler is only dead like some of the time when they open like one of their 5 anti-graveyard cards, I guess. I mean, it's debatable whether you want to put Mourner over Veiler. I know most people like Mourner's a UR, so like it's probably not good enough. Not even if it is better than Veiler, it's probably not better enough to justify just crafting 90 using 90 UR points just to make Mourners for like a very, very slight upgrade over a Veiler if you were already running Veiler. And like I don't think like many decks can run like 18 hand, like there's very few decks that can run 18 Handtraps, like pretty much only Sprite. So it is, I do like it slightly better versus Tier, and since Tier is going to be the most represented matchup, that makes me want to put it above Veiler. It's also note about Mourner is that it doesn't need to be sent to the graveyard, unlike Veiler. So obviously this won't matter against Flu, but like if you're against Sprite or an Exo Sister player who shifted you, then you know this will still give you some value instead of just being dead. Okay, I guess we should talk about Maxi, since this is the Master Duel Handtrap tier list, and we've gone a long time about talking about Maxi. I'm still putting it here. Again, well, people will say, you know, Tier plays around Maxi well. I mean, it does more so than most decks. But at the end of the day, if you Maxi them, they're gonna at most probably end on Kid Kalos Sulliek Pass, or they're gonna give you like 2 or 3 draws and end on a Dweller if they select you on Tier, and that is far better than the alternatives, which is stuff like any combination of Rogue Kalos, Dweller, protected by Sprite. If they're on Cyber Sign, they're gonna Cyber Sign you. If they're on stuff like Diviner still, for some reason, they're gonna dump Shufflers and possibly make Baron against you. They can have like just having Maxi only limits them to like maybe 2 interruptions on field or a Dweller, and not like the full board. So like that still does it more than like most Handtraps, I would say. And it's, well, besides Flu, it's good against everything else that's not Flu. I'm pretty sure it's good against every rogue matchup you're gonna see Sprite. This is like one of the few Handtraps that's good against both Sprite and Tier. And you know, Exo Sister, you know, activate Marfa, chain Maxi, you know, free Pot of Greed. Yeah, seems good. Like there's a reason that Tier builds still run triple Maxi, even if they quote unquote can play around the best. Because in a Tier mirror, right, it's like if you're both playing on Maxi equally well, and the person that resolves Maxi more is gonna win, because that person is gonna have the more cards and more resources in the matchup just to use. And I don't want to talk about this. We'll get to that later. Shifter. Okay, so Shifter is like in this category where it's obviously it's limited by the decks that can play it. Like you're not gonna play this as a Tier player, so I'm just gonna assume. I should have probably mentioned this earlier, but I'm going to assume that these Handtraps are played in decks that can play them. So in that case, Shifter is really good against Tier. Yeah, I don't want to like put it in great versus everything, because it's not. It's great versus everything. Like if you're playing any sort of anti-Tier deck, like this is again kind of a dead card, you know. And I mean, yeah, We'll say, like, the thing I mentioned about Baguska is like a real thing. Make sure if you're playing a Shifter deck, you like have some kind of way to deal with Baguska, whether that's like Sprite using Codebreaker, Virus Swordsman, or Donner for Hire to pop the Baguska, so that you can still do stuff while you Shifter yourself, or like this is gonna sound like really bad, but like if you're flu and you shifted them and then Baguska you and you don't have an out to the Baguska, you know, sometimes I've seen this happen a lot. They put the Baguska under the EMZ and you can anima take the Baguska so that you can play on the next turn. Yeah, it's surprisingly it's not an auto win by itself, unless their hand is just really graveyard focused and they can't even make a rank 4. Then yeah, it's really the nuts. And it, like, I guess Ghostmour is in the same. Reapers is in the same way. It's I would say this is more high impact than these cards. It's like all of these like trade for like one fusion name in a sense most of the time, or trade for the Kit Kalos. Reaper just, if you're trading for the Kit Kalos or trading for the fusion, Reaper just does it the best, where it just removes their ability to do Kit Kalos for that turn pretty much, unless they get really like Saki and they like mill a crime, you know, then like they're just a better player than you. But like it's arguable that you can put Winter Cherries higher than Shifter. I can see it, since like they need where a Shifter lasts for like a turn. Cherries, like they need to pretty much mill crime in order to get Kit Kalos back in rotation. Like which they're probably only gonna be on the one of, so it might potentially take some time to even get it back. But just like, I will say, I think Shifter is like more consistent, because like against good tier players, even if they lose their Kit Kalos for like a few turns, like the deck is still capable of playing the game without Kit Kalos. Like you won't have like the mill 8 with Merly play, or like the mill 5 from Kit Kalos, and like the consistency. But you can still, the deck's capable of still fusion something. Stuff like Kaleido Heart is still available. Rokolos obviously isn't, since it needs Kit Kalos and King of the Swamp is limited. But they can also go into rank 4 plays. Like just be careful if you're playing against if you're playing a deck that's not tier and you cherries them, it's not like an auto win. Just like I mentioned, Shifter often isn't. But if the thing is, you can play Winter Cherries in the mirror match as well, and that's like when you have to Kit Kalos and your opponent, tier opponent, does not have to Kit Kalos. You know, that's a huge advantage to you. But I will say that it's pretty much only useful against the tier matchup. I don't think many decks besides Flu are going to be teching in additional targets besides Kit Kalos. Like Sprite, especially Melfi Sprite, if you're playing this at all, like you definitely do not have room to put in additional targets. Like Exo Sister, you might be able to put in, like, I'm not even sure it's worth it to put in extra targets if you're playing Exo Sister, to be honest. Maybe just go harder with the tier targets and stuff. Yeah, this is primarily just like a one matchup thing. It's like, whereas the other cards here can have utility against rogue decks and non-tier matchups, like Cherries is like strictly like pretty much strictly a tier thing. So depending on how much tier you expect to face, I could either range like from being like the top of like the Great versus tier to like the bottom, just because of the lack of utility versus everything else. So yeah, I guess we can put it again up above the Graveyard Hate, because Graveyard Hate's also more targeted at tier. It's like less generally applicable than Veiler and Mourner. And speaking of like less applicable, we're finally on the bottom 5. So Gamma is a card that's good against everything that's not tier. So that means I don't know if we're putting in this category or this category, because like if you're like just terrible against tier, like I can't justify like recommending you to like even play the card, since at least Ash has some hit targets against tier and it universally blocks Maxi, which is like very important for most decks to do. Gamma is like, like you don't want to gamma a lot of the targets that you would Valor or Moira, right? Because like this is one of the only times where gamma is worse than stuff like Infern and Valor when it resolves, because you don't want to destroy the tier monsters. Like you don't want to negate the Kid Kalos search, but then kill the Kid Kalos and then have the mill 5 anyways. Like you don't want to like gamma the Rhino Heart and then have it resummon itself, and it's like yeah, what did that accomplish really, right? So, and then like unlike Herald of Orange Light, it's not live all the time. Like the minute you commit to anything on the field, like this is also it becomes a dead card. So like it not being good against the most popular deck and it not being live all the time, like it's there were side decks this would be good. Like this is amazing against everything else. It's the best hand trap against Sprite variants, but yeah, because it's like so bad against tier. And speaking of bad against tier, this is like gamma but worse. It's like gamma that doesn't even negate the first one. So like they get like imagine Ghost Ogreing a Kit Kalos. Like that's like how awful is that? Like there's like one good hit in the deck of gamma, and that's Purple Rhino, which is the limited card. That's searchable with Terraform. So the two of. But everything else against tier, like this is not it. Nibiru. Same situation. I will say Nibiru is a bit better against probably some rogue matchups than, well, actually, no, I can't even say that because Ogre is, because Ogre hits Flu, and Flu is gonna be the most represented non-tier deck probably, even though that's not gonna be by as big of a margin as tier, you know. So, but Nibiru is against EXO sometimes. Like I don't see many EXO players on ladder searching Carpe Diem to play around Nibiru, because honestly it's not even worth it to play against play around Nibiru this meta. So yeah, it'll work against EXO this year. I think it's higher impact against Sprite than Ghost Ogre is, because not only are people not going to play around Nibiru, but also if you combine Nibiru with anything else, which is if you're playing a deck with hand traps and you're playing Nibiru, I would hope you have other hand traps besides just the Nibiru. You know, so like Nibiru plus another combination of cards is much better versus Sprite and like any sort of combo deck than Ogre is. Like at the end of the day, like just pretty bad against tier itself, so I can't justify running these even if they are good against Rogue. Lancia is like not even good against Rogue. Like it hits pretty much exactly Flu under ease. I can't think of any other matchup this actually hits. It's also like the fact that it's only your opponent's turn is like whack, because you can't even turn off shufflers during your turn, which is like probably when you want to hit the shufflers the most. So yeah, no, Chaos Hunter is, I would say Chaos Hunter is slightly better than Lancia, since it can, like, it doesn't stop any of the tier stuff, it just stops the shufflers. And the problem is when you don't hit the tier stuff, like, and the shufflers aren't played, the shufflers are just like disruption. So they're free to go into anything in their extra deck. You know, any rank 4 outs this, any way to add Soliak outs the Chaos Hunter forever. Like it's never like if you're expecting Chaos Hunter to be able to shut down shufflers versus tier, like I would advise against that plan, because that's never gonna work. I've never seen it work in practice. I've gone Chaos Hunter a couple times, and like honestly, this is what is like better against Exo Sister than anything else. And like if it's only good against Exo Sister, I don't think it's worth like considering. And oh, I forgot. I've got one card. One sec. Okay. So this is future me. I forgot to include a couple hand traps. One more relevant than the other. I changed the category, the tier that Ash is in by itself, because it didn't really make much sense that Ashe is more good versus everything and okay versus tier. It's not great versus tier, right? But I will say Ashe has more use if you're not playing tier and like you're playing against tier, since Ashe, you can use Ashe during your turn to stop their mill effects, so that you can prevent them from playing on your turn, at least. Like you can Ashe their Halfness, you can Ashe their Scream, you can Ashe if they hadn't set up an elf after you hand trap them and tried to mill with Merly, you can Ashe them early. Like you're just trying to stop them from playing on your turn too. Because if you're not playing here and they get to play on both their turn and your turn, like you're gonna lose that game. And also after a bit of deliberating, I think I'm gonna move Ghost Reaper down because or Winter Cherries, because it's really good against tier, arguably better than all of these, but like it's at least these, you know, the new Blackwing deck, new goatees, sometimes like there's gonna be some matchups where these graveyard Handtraps are still good, whereas Winter Cherries will literally never be good unless you specifically have like you're playing Fluid and you have specifically 15 extra deck slots dedicated to hate for cherries. But like at that point, that's like not like one deck that can do that. So moving this down here. So the two Handtraps that I didn't get to earlier, Droll is not. Yeah, no, it's not good against tier. It's like half of the time it literally actually does nothing because they usually don't add more than 2 times during the turn even, and like the most punishing you're gonna get is like if they Agito or they start with a Shizu card add first and then you control that, and then they can't like, oh no, they can't like Pro Rhino or like they can't Stoliac if they mill that. It's just okay, but like they can still kit Callus because Callus doesn't have to add the hand, right? And like if they run Heartbeat can add in the grave. So like there's like 10 other hand, like yeah, all of literally everything up here is like I would rather run any amount of these Handtraps before I get the Droll. So, and no deck is gonna be running all of these Handtraps anyway. So like this is not something I would really consider seriously this format. Herald of Orange Light is something to consider, only specifically for tier. Like no other real deck is like probably playing Herald besides tier, like or not tier. I should say any deck that plays as Shizus heavily consider Herald of Orange Light, because Herald is like, it's like Gamma in that, you know, you don't want to hit the tier effects on the field, but unlike Gamma, Herald will always, as long as you run the requisite number of fairies, like you don't have to worry about Gamma being dead as soon as you try to do anything. You know, a very important example would be stuff like Maxi or Shifter, because if people wait for you to summon something to mill first before activating Maxi or Shifter, then Gamma is never gonna do anything for that, whereas you can still Orange Light that. So like that's big. It's also the fact that Orange Light is a discard outlet is actually the fact that it discards a card and is actually better for you most of the time than Gamma, because you can ditch a Shuffler, and ditching Shuffler plus Orange Light is insane. That's like 2 interruptions right there. Or Orange Light ditching a Miller to mill during your opponent's turn is also huge. So like it's a level 2 tuner for here, so you can go into Baron plays and stuff, which you normally wouldn't have access to. So it's like half hand trap, half like also very disruption, not just the effect negation when you combine it with an Ishizu card, and you can get your engine going too with Millers. So yeah, it's a bit more versatile, even though if it's not the greatest against tier, it's okay against. It's certainly a lot better than the group below, and it's probably the single best hand trap to use against rogue decks. So I think it deserves its spot around here. So that's about it for now. We'll see if we do staples tier list later. If I do, go check it out in the should be somewhere around here. If you have any questions or you have any opinions on any of my reasoning, feel free to comment down below. We can have discussions in the comment section, and yeah, this is just to prime us and like refresh our knowledge of the meta for the World Championship qualifiers that's happening right now. So yeah, good luck in that if you're participating.